My husband stood right in the middle of the kitchen. I paid to design, looking me dead in the eye while I cried over my father experiencing a massive stroke and coldly declared that my parents were my problem. "Your money is yours, and my money is mine," he said with a cruel smirk. I stopped crying right then and there. I smiled. I agreed with him. And 20 days after I cut off the $3,500 a month, his family had been secretly siphoning from me. His entire dynasty collapsed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth and tried to use you. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and I run a highly successful digital public relations agency right here in Atlanta. For the past 5 years, I have been married to Marcus, who is 34, and works as a mid-level finance director at a corporate firm. From the outside, we looked like the ultimate power couple. We attended all the right alumni galas for our historically black colleges. We sat in the front pews at church every Sunday. We lived in a stunning penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. But behind closed doors, my marriage was a constant battle of egos, where Marcus desperately needed to feel like the king of the castle, even though my agency brought in more than 3 times his annual salary. Marcus had this deeply ingrained provider complex. He grew up in a family that was obsessed with appearances, social standing, and traditional gender roles. His mother, Beatrice, practically worshipped the ground he walked on and constantly reminded me how lucky I was to land a corporate man. What Beatrice and Marcus conveniently ignored was that my cute little internet business, as they called it, was the engine funding our entire lifestyle. I was the one who quietly paid the mortgage on the penthouse. I was the one who covered the luxury car leases. I never threw my financial success in his face because I wanted peace in my home. I thought I was being a supportive black wife, shielding my husband from the harsh realities of the world and protecting his pride. I had no idea that my silence was just handing him the ammunition to destroy me. The illusion shattered completely on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing campaign metrics for a major client, when my phone rang. It was my mother, and she was hysterical. My father, a retired postal worker who had worked double shifts his entire life to put me through college, had just collapsed in their driveway. The doctors at the hospital confirmed it was a severe stroke. He was going to live, but the road to recovery would be brutal. The hospital social worker told us that the specialized rehabilitation facility he desperately needed would not be fully covered by his basic retirement insurance. They needed a massive down payment out of pocket immediately to secure his spot and begin the intensive therapy that could save his mobility. My hands were shaking as I ended the call. Tears were streaming down my face, blurring my vision. I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. My father was my hero. He was the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who worked with aching knees just so I could afford my college textbooks. I would do anything for him. I ran into the master bedroom where Marcus was standing in front of his full-length mirror, carefully adjusting the cuffs of a custom-tailored suit he had just bought. "Marcus," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. "It is my dad. He had a stroke. He is in the intensive care unit right now, and they are saying he needs specialized rehab that his insurance will not cover. We need to pull $15,000 from the joint savings account right now to secure his spot." Marcus did not even flinch. He did not rush over to hold me. He did not ask if my father was going to survive. He simply smoothed his silk tie, looked at my tear-stained face in the mirror, and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "Nia, we are not doing this," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am not draining our hard-earned assets to bail out a retired mailman. Your family should have planned better for their future instead of relying on us to be their personal piggy bank." I stared at him, completely paralyzed by his callousness. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" I pleaded, taking a step toward him. "This is an emergency. It is my father. We have more than enough in the joint account to cover this without even feeling it. I put 90% of that money in there myself." He turned around to face me, his expression hardening into a mask of pure arrogance. Let us get one thing straight, Nia. I am the man of this house. I make the financial decisions to protect our future. You cannot just come in here crying and expect me to throw away thousands of dollars because your parents do not know how to manage their lives. That is the problem with your side of the family. You all expect handouts. Your parents are your problem. Your money is yours and my money is mine. We are keeping our finances completely separate from now on because I will not let you drag my net worth down. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was standing there in a suit paid for by the credit card I paid off every month inside a penthouse I owned, lecturing me about financial responsibility. He was using my moment of absolute vulnerability to assert his dominance to put me in my place. He wanted to remind me that despite my success, he was the one in control. A strange sensation washed over me. The frantic panic that had been gripping my chest just moments before suddenly vanished. The tears stopped falling. The warm love I had harbored for this man turned to absolute ice. In that singular moment, I saw Marcus not as my partner, but as a parasite who hated the host he fed on. He wanted separate finances. He wanted to claim that his money was his alone, while secretly enjoying the massive financial cushion I provided. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I simply looked at him, straightening his tie and feeling like a powerful man. I wiped the last tear from my cheek. "You are absolutely right, Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "Your money is yours. My money is mine. We will keep everything completely separate starting right now." He smirked, clearly proud of himself for putting his emotional wife back in line. "Glad you finally understand how a real marriage works," he muttered, grabbing his expensive leather briefcase and walking past me out the door. He had no idea what he had just done. He had no idea that by drawing that line in the sand, he had just signed the death warrant for his entire family and their luxurious lifestyle. I walked calmly back to my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and prepared to give my husband exactly what he asked for. The heavy silence in the kitchen was violently shattered by the sharp electronic chirp of the front door keypad. I had not even moved from the spot by the island where my husband had just drawn his cruel battle lines. Footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, loud and entirely too confident. It was Chloe Marcus's younger sister trailing closely behind her husband Chase. Chase was a walking, breathing stereotype of unearned privilege, a mediocre white man who had married into a successful black family and somehow genuinely believed that gave him a permanent, unquestionable pass to be an authority on our culture and our struggles. They did not knock. They never knocked. They had the security code because Marcus had insisted his family should always have open access to our home. My home. Chase strolled straight past me without a single word of greeting, his expensive boat shoes squeaking slightly on the imported Italian tile. He bypassed the living room entirely and made a beeline for my kitchen. He swung open the custom double-door refrigerator, the exact appliance I had waited 3 agonizing months to have shipped overseas, and began rummaging through the shelves like he was searching for loose change in a couch. He carelessly shoved aside my imported cheeses and grabbed a bottle of the rare craft IPA I had specifically ordered for my agency's milestone celebrations. He popped the cap off, using the pristine edge of my quartz countertop, leaving a microscopic but permanent scratch behind that made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. He took a long, obnoxious gulp, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and finally deigned to acknowledge my presence. "Rough day at the office?" Nia Chase asked, his tone dripping with a casual arrogance that completely ignored my red, swollen eyes and trembling hands. Chloe finally drifted into the kitchen behind him, dropping her counterfeit designer bag onto the pristine island. She did not bother to ask how I was doing either, instead pulling out her phone and immediately scrolling through social media. Marcus emerged from the master bedroom at that exact moment, pouring himself a generous glass of bourbon from the crystal decanter on the bar cart. He acted as if he had not just shattered my entire world 5 minutes ago. "Nia is just upset because her dad is in the hospital," Marcus announced, casually swirling the amber liquid in his glass with a look of supreme boredom. "She actually wanted to raid our joint savings account to pay for his medical bills." He said it with a derisive chuckle, looking directly at Chase for validation and male camaraderie. Chase shook his head slowly, leaning back against my custom cabinets and taking another deep swig of my beer. Man, that is tough, Chase said, though his voice lacked even a microscopic fraction of genuine sympathy. But you know, Nia, this is exactly what I was talking about on my podcast just last week. It is this toxic culture of dependency that holds minority communities back. You have got to learn the absolute value of bootstrapping. I stood completely still. The sheer audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. This was the moment my perception of reality warped. The background noise of the city traffic outside my floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to blur into a single rushing hum. The ambient light from the chandelier above me stretched and distorted. The room was spinning, shifting and moving around me, yet I remained entirely frozen in place. It was a dizzying parallax of pure, unfiltered disgust. I was an anchor of absolute rage in a room full of moving, talking parasites. Chase kept talking, completely oblivious to the silent storm brewing in my eyes. It is a generational cycle, you see, he lectured, waving his beer bottle around like a professor addressing a slow student. You make good money, sure. But then your family expects you to be the neighborhood bank. People need to take personal responsibility for their own health and their own finances. In white families, we teach independence early on. We teach financial literacy. You guys tend to cling to this village mentality, and it just drains the successful ones dry. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep your parents warm, Nia. It is just bad business. You need to cut the cord so they learn how to survive on their own. I slowly shifted my gaze from the arrogant man sipping my stolen beer to the man I had married. I waited for Marcus to defend me. I waited for him to defend my father, a proud black man who had broken his back working double shifts in the rain and snow for decades, in a system explicitly designed to keep him down. I waited for my husband to put this condescending, freeloading guest in his place for daring to disrespect his wife and his in-laws in their own home. Instead, Marcus laughed. It was a deep, resonant chuckle of complete agreement. You hit the nail right on the head, man, Marcus said, raising his crystal glass of bourbon to Chase in a sickening toast. That is exactly what I just told her. We have to protect our own assets. We cannot be dragged down by people who refuse to pull themselves up. I looked at the three of them. Chase confidently drinking my beer and preaching about financial independence while secretly living off the allowance his mother-in-law extorted from me. Chloe admiring her freshly manicured nails, completely apathetic to the cruelty echoing in the room. And Marcus, my husband, selling his soul and betraying his wife for a cheap laugh from a man he secretly financed. I did not scream at them. I did not throw them out of my penthouse. I simply absorbed the absolute undeniable rot of their character, locking every single detail away in my mind. The pain of my father's condition was still heavy in my heart, but it was now overshadowed by a cold, calculating clarity. It was past 2 a.m. when the penthouse finally surrendered to absolute silence. The only sound left was the rhythmic, self-satisfied snoring emanating from the master bedroom, where Marcus slept soundly, completely untroubled by the devastation he had casually inflicted. I sat alone at the massive quartz kitchen island, enveloped by the darkness of the apartment. The only illumination came from the harsh, clinical glow of my laptop screen, casting long, sharp shadows against the far wall. The woman who had cried in the hallway hours earlier was dead. The supportive, peacekeeping wife who constantly shrank herself to inflate her husband's fragile ego had been permanently erased. In her place sat a strategist analyzing a battlefield. Marcus had drawn his line in the sand, declaring his money was his and my family was my problem, but he had fundamentally forgotten whose sweat actually filled that joint account. I pulled up the banking portal. I did not need his permission to save my father's life. I contributed 90% of the capital to our shared accounts. I managed the investments. I balanced the portfolios while Marcus played corporate hotshot with a mid-level title and a mid-level salary. I was going to wire the $15,000 to the rehabilitation facility, secure my father's spot, and deal with Marcus's fragile masculinity in the morning. I typed in my credentials, bypassed the security prompts, and accessed the main dashboard. My eyes immediately darted to the available balance in our primary high-yield savings. I blinked, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. The number staring back at me was wrong. It was drastically, shockingly wrong. A cold sensation started at the base of my neck and slowly crawled down my spine. I gripped the edge of the laptop, leaning in closer, as if the pixels might magically rearrange themselves into the correct digits. We had over $80,000 in that specific emergency fund just yesterday. Now it hovered at just under $65,000. My fingers flew across the trackpad, clicking into the recent transaction history. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. There at the very top of the ledger was a cleared wire transfer processed at 3 in the afternoon. It was initiated just hours before I received the frantic phone call from my mother. The amount transferred out was exactly $15,000. I stared at the screen, my mind racing to process the destination routing information. The recipient was listed as Zenith Synergy Innovations, LLC. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. Zenith Synergy Innovations was not a vendor. It was not a medical facility. It was not an investment portfolio. It was the legally registered name of Chase's pathetic, non-existent tech startup. For 3 agonizing years, Chase had been peddling a vague, buzzword-heavy concept for an app that supposedly revolutionized how local businesses networked. He had 0 coding skills, 0 marketing experience, and 0 revenue. It was a vanity project designed solely to allow him to call himself an entrepreneur while he sat around coffee shops updating his social media profiles and living entirely off the allowance Marcus's mother secretly funneled to him. And now he was living off my money. The pieces of the evening clicked together with a sickening precision. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of the kitchen conversation echoed in my mind. Chase standing in my home drinking the craft beer I paid for, lecturing me about the toxic culture of dependency. He had looked me dead in the eye and told me to cut the cord on my dying father, preaching the virtues of bootstrapping and financial independence. He delivered that arrogant, racially coded sermon with a smirk on his face, knowing full well that just hours earlier, my husband had handed him $15,000 of my hard-earned money to fund his delusional lifestyle. And Marcus had stood there and laughed. He had agreed with Chase. He had looked at my tear-stained face and told me that my retired, hardworking father was a drain on our net worth, all while actively siphoning my wealth to subsidize a mediocre man who refused to get a real job. Marcus had stolen the exact amount of money needed to save my father's mobility, perhaps his life, to buy the loyalty and admiration of his white brother-in-law. He robbed me to play the big-shot provider for a man who despised us. I did not scream. I did not throw my laptop against the imported tile floor. I did not storm into the master bedroom to drag Marcus out of bed by his custom silk pajamas. The profound rage boiling inside me crystallized into something utterly terrifying and completely silent. The camera of my own consciousness seemed to pull back, looking at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw the long, sharp shadow I cast against the dining room wall. It looked larger than life, a towering silhouette of a woman who had finally woken up from a 10-year nightmare. The grief was gone. The shock had evaporated. All that remained was a pure, concentrated executioner's focus. I minimized the shared banking window. I opened a separate encrypted browser and logged into the private accounts linked to my digital public relations agency. These were the accounts Marcus knew absolutely nothing about. Early in our marriage, I had realized his ego could not handle seeing the true scale of my corporate contracts, so I paid myself a modest salary into our joint account and kept the massive corporate retainers completely separated. I initiated an immediate expedited wire transfer directly to the Boston Rehabilitation Hospital. I paid my father's entire $30,000 medical bill in full, wiping out the debt in less than 30 seconds. I confirmed the payment receipt and forwarded it directly to my mother's email with a simple message telling her to get some sleep and that everything was handled. Then I turned my attention back to the joint account ledger. I looked at the name Zenith Synergy Innovations, LLC, one last time. Marcus wanted to play a game of separate finances. He wanted to claim that his money was his and my money was his to distribute to his parasitic family. He had drastically underestimated the woman he married. He thought he was dealing with a compliant traditional wife desperate to keep the peace. He had no idea he was dealing with a woman who controlled the narratives of Fortune 500 companies for a living. I gently reached up and closed the laptop. The soft click of the magnetic latch echoed through the cavernous, silent penthouse. I sat in the darkness, feeling the cold marble of the kitchen island beneath my fingertips. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. The rules of the house had just changed, and I was going to enjoy tearing his dynasty down to the studs. The morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows did not bring the usual warmth. The sky above the Atlanta skyline slowly shifted from a bruised purple to a cold, unforgiving gray. I had not moved from the kitchen island for hours, my posture perfectly straight, my mind operating with the terrifying clarity of a predator that had finally identified its prey. When the digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked to 6 in the morning, I placed my hands back onto the cool aluminum of my laptop. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark kitchen and casting a harsh blue light across my face. If a camera had been positioned right behind me, shooting over my shoulder and slowly zooming in on the glowing monitor, it would have captured the exact clinical moment a devoted wife transformed into an architect of absolute ruin. I opened the banking portal for the third time that night. I navigated past the joint savings account, past the depleted emergency fund. Marcus had so casually looted and clicked directly into the scheduled disbursements tab. There, sitting at the top of the automated ledger, like an arrogant, recurring parasite, was a scheduled wire transfer, $3,500, set to process on the 15th of every single month. Destination account, Beatrice Blackwell. My mother-in-law was a woman who practically lived at her megachurch, occupying the front pew every Sunday in custom-tailored pastel suits and extravagant hats that cost more than a mortgage payment. Beatrice was a master of the prosperity gospel, frequently testifying to her Bible study group about how the Lord had blessed her with a son who was the ultimate provider. She loved to hold court at lavish post-service brunches, paying the bill with a gold card while loudly praising Marcus for ensuring his aging mother lived in absolute comfort and dignity. It was a beautiful, pious narrative that brought her immense social currency within her elite religious circles. It was also a complete and utter fabrication. The $3,500 that magically materialized in her checking account every month did not come from Marcus's mid-level corporate salary. It came directly from the revenue generated by my public relations agency. It had started 3 years ago as a temporary supplement. Beatrice had called Marcus in tears, claiming she needed emergency roof repairs and a minor medical procedure her premium insurance somehow did not cover. Marcus had come to me using my own empathy against me. He had looked into my eyes and delivered a passionate speech about how a real man takes care of his mother. And since our finances were a unified front, it was our shared duty to protect her. Through his strategic guilt-tripping and my desperate desire to be the supportive, flawless daughter-in-law that temporary fix had silently mutated into a permanent, non-negotiable monthly allowance. But the financial parasitism did not stop at Beatrice. Through casual observations, Chloe's accidental slip-ups, and the sheer mathematical impossibility of Chase's lifestyle, I had figured out the secondary layer of this familial scam months ago. Beatrice was the ultimate enabler. She was quietly siphoning a massive portion of that monthly allowance directly into Chloe and Chase's pockets. My hard-earned money, the capital I generated by working 14-hour days and managing global brand crises, was actively funding Chloe's counterfeit designer wardrobe and Chase's endless supply of imported craft beer. My money was bankrolling the least luxury SUV Chase drove around town while he pretended to be an entrepreneur. My money was paying for the very lifestyle that allowed Chase to stand in my kitchen, drink my beer, and confidently lecture me about the toxic culture of dependency. The absolute sheer audacity of it burned in my chest. He had preached about self-reliance, bootstrapping, and financial independence, blissfully unaware that his entire existence was subsidized by a black woman he openly disrespected. Marcus had enforced a strict rule that my family was my problem and my money was mine, all while secretly demanding my money to fund the delusions of his white brother-in-law and his spoiled sister. The over-the-shoulder view of my screen would show my cursor gliding across the pristine white background of the banking portal. It bypassed the transaction details and moved with deliberate, unwavering precision toward the right side of the screen. It hovered directly over the bold text that read "Cancel recurring transfer." I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not experience a moment of hesitation or sentimental regret. I thought of my father lying in a hospital bed, a man who had actually worked for every single dollar he had ever earned, being dismissed as a burden by a family of professional leeches. I pressed down heavily on the trackpad. The screen refreshed instantly. A bright green checkmark materialized in the center of the monitor. Transfer successfully deleted. With that single silent click, I officially severed the financial umbilical cord. I had just locked the main blood valve to the Blackwell family. It was the digital equivalent of planting a delayed explosive device right beneath their foundation. Today was the 15th. The automated transfer usually hit Beatrice's account by 9 in the morning. In exactly 3 hours, Beatrice would log into her banking app to pay her exorbitant country club dues and forward Chase his weekly allowance. She would refresh the page, she would call the bank, and she would discover that the well had run completely dry. Without my $3,500, Beatrice's house of cards would immediately collapse. Without Beatrice's hidden subsidies, Chloe and Chase's illusion of wealth would evaporate by noon. They would all inevitably panic and run crying to their golden boy Marcus, demanding a financial rescue. And the truly beautiful poetic irony of it all was that Marcus could not save them. He did not have the liquid cash. He had just blown his only available slush fund, wiring $15,000 to Chase's fake startup to look like a big shot. They were about to cannibalize each other, and I had orchestrated the entire famine with a single click. I closed the encrypted browser, shut down the laptop, and stood up from the island. I stretched my stiff muscles, feeling lighter, sharper, and more dangerous than I had ever felt in my entire life. I walked into the master bathroom, washed my face, applied my most expensive moisturizer, and carefully concealed the redness around my eyes. By the time Marcus finally stirred and walked out into the kitchen, adjusting the cuffs of his freshly pressed shirt, I was standing by the espresso machine, looking like the absolute picture of domestic tranquility. "Morning," Marcus mumbled, reaching for the mug I had just filled. "You look better today. Calmer. I guess you finally realized I was right about setting firm financial boundaries." I handed him the steaming coffee, looking directly into his arrogant, oblivious eyes. My smile was perfectly warm, betraying absolutely none of the lethal intent coursing through my veins. "You were absolutely right, Marcus," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Firm financial boundaries are exactly what this family needs. We are going to keep everything completely separate from now on." He took a sip of his coffee, a smug, victorious grin spreading across his face, completely unaware that the countdown timer on his entire existence had just hit 0. The heavy glass doors of Vanguard Public Relations parted smoothly as I stepped off the private elevator. The ambient hum of the agency instantly enveloped me. It was a symphony of ringing phones, hushed strategic conversations, and the rapid clicking of keyboards. It served as the perfect white noise for my newly sharpened focus. I moved through the bullpen with long, decisive strides. Junior executives scrambled to look busy, parting like the Red Sea as I made my way down the central corridor. I offered crisp, professional nods to my department heads, betraying absolutely nothing of the domestic war I had just declared. My tailored designer suit felt like heavy armor. This was my domain. Here I was not the accommodating wife or the convenient bank account to be raided. I was the founder and CEO. I handled catastrophic corporate crises that threatened billions in market capitalization on a daily basis. Dismantling the fragile, pathetic facade of the Blackwell family was practically a side project. I swept into my corner office, the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline I had conquered. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside a soundproof vault of absolute authority. I dropped my leather briefcase onto the pristine glass desk and immediately bypassed my regular agency computer. Instead, I reached for the secure encrypted tablet I kept locked in my lower drawer, the device I used exclusively for personal asset management. The next phase of my retaliation required a very specific surgical touch. If canceling Beatrice's monthly allowance was a localized strike to her cash flow, this next move was designed to completely obliterate her primary source of social superiority. Beatrice lived in a stunning two-bedroom luxury condominium in the heart of Buckhead. It featured wraparound balconies, private concierge service, imported Italian marble bathrooms, and a monthly maintenance fee that alone would bankrupt an average family. She absolutely loved hosting her church auxiliary meetings there, pouring tea from silver pots, and casually dropping hints about how her brilliant, successful son Marcus had secured the property for her. Marcus, in his infinite need to be worshipped by the women in his family, had happily taken the credit for the entire arrangement. He told his mother that he had leveraged his elite corporate connections to get her an indefinite rent-free lease as a special perk of his supposed high-level executive status. It was a beautiful, comforting lie. The truth of the matter was far more satisfying. Marcus had absolutely no connections in luxury real estate. He barely had connections in his own mid-level management department. 5 years ago, when Beatrice was facing imminent foreclosure on her dilapidated suburban home due to her own staggering financial negligence, Marcus had panicked. He had come to me literally begging me to save his mother from public embarrassment. I did not just help her. I bought the Buckhead condominium outright in cash. However, I was not foolish. I deliberately purchased the property through an anonymous holding company, Obsidian Holdings LLC, explicitly to protect the asset from any potential liabilities or familial entitlement. Marcus was so relieved that the problem had been solved that he never bothered to read the closing documents. He just took the keys from my hand, drove to his mother's house, and soaked up the glory of being the savior. He honestly believed the apartment was a permanent gift, an asset that belonged to the Blackwell name by default. He forgot that my name was the only one on the deed. I tapped the illuminated screen, pulling up the confidential contact file for Sterling Property Management. They were the ruthless, elite firm I paid handsomely to act as the aggressive public face of Obsidian Holdings. I dialed the direct line for Arthur Pendleton, the senior managing director. He answered on the second ring, his tone polished sharp and immediately deferential. "Good morning, Arthur," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Good morning, madam. How can Sterling be of service today?" he replied. I skipped the standard pleasantries. "We are initiating a status change on the Buckhead property," I instructed, watching the city traffic crawl far below my window. "The current occupant of Penthouse Unit 4B is no longer authorized to reside on a complimentary guest basis. The rent-free arrangement is effectively terminated starting today." Arthur did not ask questions. He was a professional who understood the nature of anonymous LLCs and wealthy clients. He simply typed the rapid clicking of his keyboard echoing over the speakerphone. "Understood. Shall we initiate standard market rate protocols?" he asked. "Exactly," I confirmed. "I want you to draft a formal legally binding notice of rent commencement. Starting on the 1st of the upcoming month, Beatrice Blackwell will be responsible for the full market rate of the unit. What is our current market valuation for that specific floor plan?" Arthur tapped a few keys. "Given the recent upgrades to the building amenities and the current demand in Buckhead, market rate for Unit 4B is currently assessed at $8,500 per month, plus utilities and association fees." I felt a cold, hard knot of satisfaction tighten in my chest. "Perfect. Draft the notice for $8,500 a month. Include a clause stating that if the rent is not remitted in full by the 5th of the month, Sterling Property Management is authorized to initiate standard eviction proceedings without any further delay, grace periods, or negotiation." "Consider it done," Arthur said smoothly. "How would you like the notice delivered?" I dictated my final instructions with absolute precision. Send it via certified mail, but I also want it hand-delivered by the building concierge directly to Beatrice this morning. I want her signature on the receipt. She needs to understand that this is a formal legal action from the property holding company. I will have the documents drawn up and served before noon today, Arthur promised. Is there anything else regarding the Obsidian portfolio? That will be all for today, Arthur. Thank you. I ended the call and set the tablet face down on the glass desk. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, interlacing my fingers and staring up at the acoustic ceiling tiles. The trap was perfectly and flawlessly set. The beauty of the strategy was its undeniable legality. Beatrice had no income, no retirement savings, and as of 6 o'clock this morning, no monthly allowance to fall back on. She was about to be hit with an astronomical rent bill for a luxurious lifestyle she had grown accustomed to but never actually owned or earned. When that concierge handed her the thick manila envelope, her entire world of religious superiority and unearned prosperity would shatter. She would immediately panic. She would grab her phone and run screaming to Marcus, demanding that he fix the problem, demanding that he leverage his imaginary corporate connections to stop the holding company from throwing her out onto the street. And Marcus would be completely, utterly powerless to stop the eviction. He could not call the property manager because his name was nowhere on the LLC documentation. He could not write a check to cover her first month of rent because he had just drained his only available slush fund to finance Chase's fake startup company. He was entirely trapped by his own financial infidelity and his relentless desire to play the wealthy patriarch with my money. The Blackwells were about to realize that the empire they were so incredibly proud of was built entirely on land that I owned, and I had just decided to revoke their access. I did not pause to bask in the victory of Arthur Pendleton's swift execution. The adrenaline coursing through my veins demanded forward momentum. The war was far from over, and I was only just beginning to dismantle their financial lifelines. I pulled up a third secure window on my tablet, bypassing the real estate portfolios and diving straight into the operational expenses of my public relations agency. 3 years ago, Marcus had orchestrated a masterful guilt trip, convincing me that Chase needed a company credit card to network with potential angel investors for his non-existent tech startup. Marcus argued it was a minor business expense, a temporary crutch that could be categorized under client outreach and public relations. Like a fool, desperate to maintain peace within my marriage, I had authorized a secondary platinum corporate card in Chase's name. I had essentially handed a loaded financial weapon to a toddler. I clicked open the itemized monthly billing statement. The sheer audacity of the charges made my vision swim. There were no charges for software development, no server hosting fees, and absolutely no networking events. Instead, the ledger was a masterclass in parasitic luxury. There was a $400 charge at an exclusive day spa, undoubtedly Chloe indulging in a deep tissue massage. There were $1,000 dinner receipts at Steakhouse's luxury car, detailing services and premium subscriptions to exclusive clubs. They were using the sweat of my 14-hour workdays to fund a lifestyle of absolute leisure. If the universe were a movie screen, it would have split perfectly down the middle, right at that moment. On the left side of the screen would be me sitting in the absolute serene silence of my corner office, my manicured finger hovering deliberately over the digital master switch of my corporate accounts. On the right side of the screen, 20 miles away from my office, the reality of my pending actions was about to collide violently with Chase's delusions. Chase was currently standing in the center of the wildly expensive pro shop at the Oak Ridge Country Club. The air around him smelled of fresh-cut grass, polished leather, and generational wealth. He was not alone. He had cornered two older, highly successful venture capitalists he had been desperately trying to impress for months. He was in his element, playing the role of the disruptive young tech founder, laughing loudly and slapping the wealthy men on the back as if they were old fraternity brothers. "You have to spend money to make money, gentlemen," Chase declared, his voice carrying across the quiet hum of the luxury boutique. He reached out and confidently grabbed a custom set of imported titanium golf clubs. They were the absolute top of the line, the kind of equipment reserved for men who actually possessed the net worth to justify a $2,800 recreational purchase. Chase slung the heavy leather bag over his shoulder with an arrogant smirk, clearly believing that buying the most expensive item in the room would somehow validate his existence to the men standing beside him. He strutted up to the polished mahogany checkout counter and dropped the bag with a heavy, satisfying thud. The shop manager, an older man with sharp eyes who catered exclusively to the city's elite, rang up the total. Chase did not even blink. He reached into his designer wallet, the one he had likely purchased with my money, and pulled out the heavy metal corporate card bearing my agency's name. He dropped it onto the counter with a loud clack, making sure the two venture capitalists saw the premium card. "I will take the clubs and put my guests' greens fees on there as well," Chase announced magnanimously. The manager nodded politely, picked up the heavy metal card, and slid it through the point-of-sale terminal. Back in my office, my personal cell phone illuminated face up on my glass desk. A push notification immediately broke the silence. The automated security system from my corporate card provider flagged a pending transaction for $3,240 at the Oak Ridge Country Club. I stared at the notification. The sheer entitlement of the man was breathtaking. He was buying toys while my father lay in a hospital bed. I shifted my eyes from my phone back to the tablet screen. I located the specific card number assigned to Chase. I did not just pause the card. I did not place a temporary hold on the account. I selected the option to permanently report the card as stolen instantly and irrevocably, killing the magnetic strip and the internal chip. I confirmed the termination, watching the status bar shift from a healthy green active to a stark dead red deactivated. At the Oak Ridge Country Club, the point-of-sale terminal let out a sharp, unforgiving electronic beep. The manager stared at the digital screen, his polite customer service smile freezing on his face. He looked down at the metal card, then looked up at Chase. "I am sorry, sir," the manager said, his voice dropping to a low, discreet volume to spare Chase the public embarrassment. "It seems your card has been declined." Chase let out a loud, patronizing laugh, waving his hand as if the machine itself had insulted him. "That is impossible. It is a premium corporate account. There is no limit. The magnetic reader on your machine must be dirty. Run it again." The two venture capitalists shifted uncomfortably behind him. The manager, maintaining his rigid professionalism, wiped the card on his sleeve and slid it through the reader a second time. The machine beeped again, louder this time. The red text flashing across the digital display was undeniable. "Declined. Do not honor." Chase's arrogant smirk faltered, the corners of his mouth twitching as a hot flush of red began to creep up his neck. He quickly patted his pockets, acting thoroughly inconvenienced. "You know how these fraud protection algorithms are," he said over his shoulder to his guests, his voice pitching slightly higher with sudden, desperate anxiety. "I travel so much they lock the account down if I buy a coffee in the wrong zip code. Just punch the numbers in manually." The manager sighed internally, but obliged. He meticulously typed the 16 digits into the keypad, followed by the expiration date and the security code. He pressed enter. The machine processed the manual request for 3 agonizing seconds before spitting out a printed receipt. The manager ripped the paper from the machine and placed it on the counter, sliding it toward Chase. "I am afraid it is not a fraud alert, sir," the manager said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy now. "The issuing bank has explicitly revoked this card. The account has been permanently terminated." The silence in the pro shop was absolute. The two venture capitalist men who built their fortunes by reading people and assessing risk exchanged a single knowing look. They did not say a word. They simply turned on their heels and walked out the glass doors, leaving Chase standing alone at the counter. The illusion of the wealthy tech founder evaporated instantly, leaving behind nothing but a broke, unemployed man staring at a piece of dead metal. Simultaneously across town, in an upscale boutique, Chloe approached a checkout counter with a $1,000 handbag draped over her arm. She handed her matching corporate card to the cashier with a practiced, entitled smile. 10 seconds later, she was standing in the middle of the store, arguing frantically with a teenager holding a declined receipt, her face burning with the exact same public humiliation her husband was currently enduring. I sat back in my leather chair, letting the deep, profound silence of my office wash over me. The trap was completely sprung. They had zero cash, zero credit, and as of next week, zero housing. The empire of lies was completely defunded. The heavy silence of my corner office was punctured exactly 4 minutes later. My personal cell phone, resting face up on the pristine glass of my desk, began to vibrate violently, buzzing against the hard surface like an angry wasp. I did not immediately reach for it. I simply sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap, and watched the name flash across the screen: Chase. If a cinematic lens were capturing this exact moment, it would be mounted on a Steadicam, pushing in close and beginning a slow, continuous, unbroken orbit around my leather chair. It would circle me, capturing the absolute, undisturbed stillness of my posture against the sweeping backdrop of the Atlanta skyline. It would capture the contrast between the serene, untouchable atmosphere of my corporate fortress and the frantic, vibrating panic contained within that small digital device on my desk. I let it ring. I let the panic marinate. I let him stand in the parking lot of that country club, sweating through his pastel polo shirt, before I finally reached out and swiped the green icon to accept the call. I did not say hello. I simply lifted the phone to my ear and waited. "Nia, what the hell is going on?" Chase's voice exploded through the receiver. He was practically panting, his breath hitching with a mixture of exertion and sheer panic. The smooth, arrogant cadence he had utilized in my kitchen less than 12 hours ago was completely eradicated. "I am standing outside the pro shop at Oak Ridge. I just had the most humiliating experience of my entire life. My card was declined. The machine said the account was terminated. You need to call the bank right now and fix this glitch. I have two massive investors waiting for me at the clubhouse and I look like a complete idiot. Call your accounting department and clear this up." I remained perfectly still as the imaginary camera completed its first slow orbit around me. My gaze remained fixed on the traffic flowing through the city arteries far below. "There is no glitch, Chase," I said, my voice completely flat, lacking even a microscopic trace of sympathy or urgency. "I instructed the bank to permanently terminate the card. The account is closed." The line went dead quiet for 3 long seconds. The ambient noise of the country club parking lot, the distant sound of a golf cart engine filtered through the speaker. When Chase finally spoke again, the confusion had evaporated, replaced by a sudden, volatile hostility. "You closed it!" He repeated, his voice dropping into a dangerous, threatening register. "What do you mean you closed it? You cannot just turn off my funding, Nia. We had an agreement. Marcus gave me that card for corporate expenses. You have absolutely no right to interfere with my business operations just because you are having a bad day." "You do not have a business, Chase," I replied smoothly. "You have a hobby. A very expensive, completely unprofitable hobby that I am no longer interested in subsidizing." That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Cornered, humiliated, and stripped of his unearned financial armor, Chase resorted to the only weapon mediocre men have left when a woman strips them of their power. He resorted to ugly, predictable prejudice. "You know what your problem is?" he snarled, his voice rising, echoing shrilly through the phone. "You are so predictable. This is exactly what Marcus complains about. You cannot handle seeing a man take charge. You cannot handle someone else having vision. You just have to be the petty, vindictive, angry black woman, do not you?" I did not flinch. I did not frown. A slow, chilling smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth as the Steadicam of my mind continued its smooth, predatory circle around my desk. "You are throwing a massive ghetto tantrum because you are jealous," Chase continued, practically spitting the words into his phone. "You are threatened by my potential. You purposely waited until I was with high net worth individuals to try and emasculate me. You think because you make a little money you can treat my family like trash. You are a bitter, angry woman who is throwing a fit because her dad is sick, and you are taking it out on me. Turn the card back on Nia. Turn it on right now, or I swear to God I am calling Marcus and telling him exactly how his wife is behaving." He was breathing heavily now, clearly expecting me to explode. He expected me to scream to defend myself against the racist caricature he had just weaponized against me. He wanted me to be the angry black woman because an angry woman is emotional and an emotional woman makes mistakes. An emotional woman can be dismissed as hysterical. But I was not angry. Anger is a hot, messy, uncontrolled emotion. What I felt was entirely cold. It was the absolute 0-degree temperature of pure, unfiltered power. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper yet, carrying the cutting weight of a scalpel. "Turn the card on Nia," he demanded, though the bravado in his voice was already beginning to fracture against my icy calm. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the glass desk. "I thought your primary rule was bootstrapping Chase." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and profound. I could practically hear the gears grinding to a halt in his mind as the words registered. I was standing right there in the kitchen. I continued, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "I listened to your incredibly insightful podcast philosophy. You were very clear. You said that the culture of dependency is toxic. You said that people need to take personal responsibility for their own finances, and that relying on successful family members is a generational curse. You looked me in the eye and told me that I could not set myself on fire to keep others warm." "Nia, listen to me," Chase stammered, his voice suddenly dropping an octave, the aggressive bluster evaporating into pure, unadulterated panic. He realized exactly what was happening. He realized I had heard every single word of his cruel, condescending lecture regarding my father. "I am simply taking your brilliant advice, Chase," I said, talking over his pathetic attempt to backtrack. "I am cutting the cord. I am forcing you to learn how to survive on your own merit instead of living off the wealth of a black woman you despise. I am protecting my assets. It is not a tantrum. It is just good business." "You cannot do this," he pleaded, the sheer desperation making his voice crack. "You are stranding me here. I have to pay for the greens fees. I have to pay for the lunch." "Use your own money," I suggested lightly. "Pull yourself up by your boat shoes." "I am calling Marcus Chase," threatened, grasping blindly for his ultimate safety net. "I am calling him right now. He will overrule this. He will tear you apart for humiliating me like this." My smile widened, reaching my eyes for the first time all morning. "Call him," I whispered. "Please call my husband. Call the man who secretly wired you $15,000 of my money yesterday afternoon while I was dealing with my father's hospitalization. Call Zenith Synergy Innovations, LLC's primary investor, and demand that he save you." Chase let out a sharp gasp. He knew. He knew that I knew everything. The covert, passive-aggressive Cold War we had been fighting for 3 years was officially over. We were in open, scorched earth territory now. "But before you call him," I added, twisting the knife one final time, "you should probably know that Marcus cannot help you. He cannot wire you emergency funds. He cannot pay your country club bill. He cannot even buy you a coffee right now, because I just locked him out of every single account I control. He is just as broke as you are today. Good luck with your investors, Chase." I pressed the red button to end the call before he could utter another sound. I placed the phone back down on the glass desk, matching it perfectly parallel to the edge of my keyboard. The conflict was no longer hidden in the shadows of joint accounts and silent resentment. The blood valve was locked, the privileges were revoked, and the war was entirely beautifully overt. The profound, immaculate silence of my office lasted exactly 22 minutes. I utilized that brief window of tranquility to sip my sparkling water and watch the digital indicators on my secure tablet confirm that every single financial artery connecting the Blackwell family to my personal wealth had been successfully cauterized. The sudden peace, however, was merely the receding tide before a massive tsunami. The disruption began as a low, vibrating murmur bleeding through the thick, soundproof glass of my office walls. It quickly escalated into a sharp, chaotic crescendo of raised voices and scuffling heels echoing across the polished hardwood floors of the outer bullpen. I did not need to check the security feeds to know what was happening. The heavy, frantic footsteps stomping down the central corridor belonged to a woman whose entire unearned reality had just been served to her in a manila envelope by a very punctual concierge. My executive assistant, Sarah, a fiercely protective woman who guarded my schedule like a fortress, appeared briefly in the glass frame of my doorway, her arms raised in a futile attempt to block the intruder. "You absolutely cannot go in there without an appointment," Sarah stated, her voice tight with professional panic. "She is in a closed-door session." "Get out of my way, you pathetic little secretary," a shrill, hysterical voice screeched. "I am her mother-in-law. I am family." The heavy oak door was violently shoved open, slamming against the rubber wall stop with a deafening crack that made several junior executives in the bullpen visibly jump in their seats. Beatrice Blackwell stood on the threshold, a vision of twisted, suffocating fury. She was dressed in her immaculate Sunday best, a tailored pastel suit, and a string of authentic pearls that I had purchased for her 60th birthday. Her normally perfectly coiffed hair was slightly disheveled, and her face was contorted into a mask of righteous, self-absorbed indignation. She was clutching the thick manila envelope from Sterling Property Management in her trembling right hand, waving it like a weapon. If the air in the room had a physical shape, it suddenly tilted dangerously off its axis. The entire perspective of my pristine, symmetrical office warped into a psychological Dutch angle, creating a suffocating, disorienting atmosphere of moral decay. Beatrice brought the toxicity of her entitlement straight into my sanctuary, polluting the very oxygen I breathed. Sarah looked at me, her face flushed with anxiety, silently asking if she should call building security. I simply raised a single manicured hand palm outward. "It is fine, Sarah," I said, my voice projecting a cool, terrifying calm that contrasted violently with Beatrice's erratic panting. "You may return to your desk, but please leave the door wide open." Beatrice marched into the center of my office, her heels stabbing the imported rug. She did not want the door closed. She wanted an audience. She thrived on public martyrdom. She threw the manila envelope onto my glass desk, the heavy paper sliding across the smooth surface and coming to a rest right next to my deactivated phone. "What is the meaning of this demonic piece of paper?" Beatrice demanded, her chest heaving, as she pointed a trembling finger at the eviction notice. "You have lost your absolute mind, Nia. A notice of rent. $8,500 a month. You are trying to throw me out onto the street like a common vagrant." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, interlacing my fingers and resting them gently on my lap. "I am simply transferring the financial liability of that property to its current occupant, Beatrice. You have lived rent-free in a luxury penthouse for 5 years. The complimentary grace period has officially expired." "You wicked, wicked girl!" Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with a theatrical religious fervor. She instinctively clutched the pearl necklace at her throat, weaponizing her faith exactly as she always did when cornered. Proverbs 14, verse 1. "The wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands, the foolish one tears hers down." You are destroying this family, Nia. You are a destructive, unfilial daughter-in-law, tearing down the very foundation of your husband's home with your petty, vindictive greed. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. I simply let her hysterical, manufactured righteousness hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment. The open door meant that a dozen of my employees were sitting at their desks in the bullpen, completely silent, listening to every single word of her unhinged sermon. "I am not tearing down a house, Beatrice," I corrected her, my tone surgically precise. "I am simply pulling up the foundation that I personally bought and paid for. You seem to be under the severe delusion that Marcus provided that penthouse for you. He did not. I bought it. In cash. Just like I have bought and paid for every single aspect of your comfortable, deeply unearned lifestyle." Beatrice's eyes widened, a flash of genuine panic breaking through her angry facade. She knew the truth, of course she did, but acknowledging it meant admitting her own parasitic nature. "You have a duty to honor your husband and his family," she preached, her voice rising an octave in desperate defense. "We embraced you. We welcomed you into the Blackwell name. And this is how you repay my love. By cutting off my monthly allowance this morning." My debit card was declined at the grocery store. I had to leave a cart full of food at the register like a beggar because you decided to play God with my bank account. I tilted my head slightly, studying her, as if she were a fascinating, grotesque insect trapped under glass. That is exactly what I wanted to discuss, Beatrice. The monthly allowance, $3,500 transferred directly into your personal checking account on the first of every single month for the last 3 years. I stood up slowly, the movement deliberately calculated to assert my physical and authoritative dominance in the room. I walked around the edge of my glass desk, closing the distance between us, until I was standing merely 3 feet away from her. Beatrice instinctively took a half step backward, her bravado faltering against my absolute chilling stillness. I provided that allowance so you could live comfortably in your golden years. I said, my voice low, dangerous, and perfectly clear. You had no rent, you had no car payment, your utilities were covered by my holding company. So tell me, Beatrice, what exactly were you doing with $3,500 of my money every single month? Where did it go? Beatrice puffed up her chest, attempting to wrap herself in her twisted, distorted morality. I was using it for family. I was doing the Lord's work, helping those who needed it. It was my money to distribute as I saw fit, helping who I pressed, refusing to let her hide behind vague religious platitudes. Because we both know you have zero savings. You are not donating it to the church. You are directly funding Chase. You are taking the money I gave you to survive, and you are handing it straight to your white son-in-law so he could play pretend tech mogul. The atmosphere in the room tightened to the point of snapping. Beatrice's face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. Driven into a corner, stripped of her lies and suffocating under the weight of her own hypocrisy, the polite suburban mask she wore completely shattered. The ugly, putrid truth living at the core of her soul violently erupted. And why should not I give it to him? Beatrice screamed, her voice echoing out of my office and ringing across the entire floor of Vanguard Public Relations. Chase is a white man. He has a certain status to maintain in this world. He needs to keep up appearances to secure business and build a future for my daughter. He cannot be seen driving a cheap car or wearing cheap suits. He requires that financial backing to be taken seriously. She took a step toward me, her eyes blazing with an audacity so deeply rooted in centuries of entitlement that it was almost breathtaking. But you, she spat, her lip curling with absolute unfiltered disgust. You are a black woman. Your people are built for this. You are entirely used to suffering and struggling and carrying the heavy load. It is in your nature to work hard and endure. Chase is not built for that kind of hardship. He needs the support. You have more money than you know what to do with, so it is your duty to provide for him. You should be honored that your money is helping elevate this family. The silence that followed her statement was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating, devastating silence. Outside my office, I could hear the sharp, audible gasp of one of my junior copywriters. Keyboards had completely stopped clicking. The entire agency had frozen in collective horror, paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated racism that had just been casually spewed into the corporate air. Beatrice stood there, chest heaving, waiting for my reaction. She genuinely believed what she had just said. In her warped, parasitic mind, my labor, my intellect, and my blackness were simply resources to be harvested and funneled into the pockets of the white men in her family to ensure their comfort. She believed my purpose on this earth was to act as the tireless mule for their unearned privilege. I did not scream. I did not strike her, though the urge vibrated in the marrow of my bones. I simply looked at her, letting the cold, calculating ice of my retaliation freeze over the final remnants of my empathy. I understand perfectly now, Beatrice. I whispered, my voice slicing through the heavy air like a razor blade. You believe I am built for suffering. You believe I am built to carry the heavy load. I walked slowly back behind my desk and picked up the eviction notice she had thrown at me. I held it out toward her. Then let us test that theory, I said, dropping the document onto the floor at her feet. Because starting right now, the Blackwell family is going to learn exactly what it feels like to carry their own weight. You have until the 5th of the month to pay the $8,500, or my holding company will have the sheriff remove your belongings and place them on the curb. Now get out of my building before I have security drag you out by your pearls. I left the office precisely at 5 o'clock. The drive back to our sprawling estate in the affluent enclave of Tuxedo Park was entirely uneventful, a stark contrast to the absolute carnage I had unleashed throughout the day. I walked through the massive iron double doors of the house I had purchased, stepping onto the imported hardwood floors I had painstakingly selected. The house was silent, perfectly climate-controlled, and smelling faintly of the expensive cedar and bergamot candles the housekeeper kept burning. I poured myself a single glass of a very rare, very expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, walked into the formal living room, and sat down on the custom velvet sofa. I crossed my legs, rested the wine glass on my knee, and waited for the inevitable arrival of the patriarch. He did not keep me waiting long. Exactly 42 minutes later, the peace of the evening was violently shattered. If a cinematographer were capturing Marcus's arrival, the camera would have been mounted on a Steadicam, tracking him from the driveway, moving in a tight, jarring angle that perfectly reflected his aggressive, volatile energy. The heavy iron front door was practically kicked open. It slammed backward against the interior wall with a concussive boom that echoed through the three-story foyer. Nia, his voice roared through the house thick with unchecked rage. I did not move. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. Marcus stormed down the central hallway, his heavy footsteps thudding aggressively against the wood. The imaginary tracking shot would have followed him closely from behind, capturing the rigid tension in his broad shoulders and the erratic, furious swing of his arms. He hurled his leather briefcase onto the pristine marble surface of the entryway console, knocking over a priceless decorative vase. It hit the floor and shattered into a dozen pieces, but he did not even look down. He was a man possessed by the absolute certainty of his own manufactured authority. He rounded the corner into the formal living room and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting there in absolute, unbothered silence. His chest was heaving under his tailored dress shirt, his tie loosened and askew. His face was a mask of dark, thunderous fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Marcus bellowed, closing the distance between us until he was towering over me, his physical presence designed to intimidate, to dominate, to force me into submission. "Have you completely lost your mind?" I looked up at him, my expression perfectly smooth. "I am having a quiet evening, Marcus. Please stop screaming." He let out a harsh, incredulous laugh, dragging a hand aggressively over his face. "You are having a quiet evening." My mother is in absolute hysterics. She called me weeping, saying you had the audacity to serve her with an eviction notice. An eviction notice, Nia. On the penthouse I secured for her. And then Chase calls me completely humiliated in front of two major investors because you threw a vindictive little temper tantrum and deactivated his corporate card. I set my wine glass down on the marble coaster resting on the coffee table. You did not secure that penthouse, Marcus. Obsidian Holdings, LLC secured that penthouse, and I am the sole proprietor of that holding company. As for Chase, he is not an employee of Vanguard Public Relations. He has no legal right to wield a corporate credit card tied to my business accounts. I am simply auditing my assets. Marcus slammed his fist down hard on the heavy mahogany side table, making the lampshade rattle. "Do not give me that corporate audit nonsense," he snarled, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. "You are not at the agency right now, Nia. You are in my house. You are talking to your husband. You do not get to play the ruthless CEO with me. I know exactly what this is. You are acting out. You are lashing out at my family because you are stressed about your father, and you are using our money to punish the people I love. Our money." The sheer delusion required to utter those two words was truly a medical marvel. I leaned back into the velvet cushions observing him, as one might observe a fascinating, highly aggressive primate in a laboratory setting. He truly believed his own press. He had spent so many years playing the role of the affluent, powerful executive in front of his mother, his sister, and his free-minding brother-in-law that he had genuinely forgotten where the funds originated. He had convinced himself that his mid-level management salary somehow financed this $10 million estate, his luxury vehicles, and his family's extravagant lifestyle. "You humiliated my mother," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. You disrespected my brother-in-law. You took the private internal issues of our marriage and you made them public. You emasculated my family, Nia. And I will not tolerate a disobedient, erratic wife tearing down the respect I have built in this city. He began to pace the length of the living room, waving his arms as he worked himself into a righteous, patriarchal frenzy. This is exactly why successful men warn each other about marrying women like you. You get a little bit of money, a little bit of success, and suddenly you forget your place. You forget how to be a supportive wife. You turn into this aggressive, angry, spiteful woman the second you do not get your way. You are acting completely out of control, and it is my job to rein you in. I watched his pacing, my face giving away absolutely nothing. Are you quite finished? I asked softly. No, I am not finished, he roared, spinning around to point a commanding finger directly at my chest. I am the man of this house. I am the financial director of my division. I understand how money works in this town, Nia. I understand how power works. I am the one who protects you. I am the reason you are accepted in these social circles. Do you really think these wealthy elite families in Atlanta respect a loud, overbearing black woman running a PR firm? They tolerate you because you are on my arm. They tolerate you because of my status. The tragic irony of his statement was almost too heavy to carry. Marcus's title was a glorified administrative role. He managed spreadsheets for a regional logistics company. He did not build wealth. He did not generate capital. He attended charity galas and high society dinners strictly because Vanguard Public Relations sponsored the tables, and I was the founder of Vanguard. He was the plus one. He was the accessory. Yet standing here in the living room I had paid for, he was aggressively claiming the throne. Here is what is going to happen, Marcus stated, planting his feet firmly apart, puffing out his chest as he delivered his ultimate devastating decree. You are going to pick up your phone right now. You are going to call Sterling Property Management, and you are going to revoke that ridiculous eviction notice. You are going to formally transfer the deed of that penthouse into my name, so you can never pull a stunt like this again. Then you are going to reactivate Chase's corporate card and double his limit to apologize for the embarrassment you caused him today. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing into cold, hard slits. And tomorrow morning you are going to drive to my mother's house, look her in the eye and beg for her forgiveness. You are going to apologize for disrespecting the matriarch of my family. I stared at him. The absolute silence in the room stretched out thick and heavy. And if I refused to comply with these demands, I asked, my voice deadly calm. Marcus let out a cruel, barking laugh. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, a gesture of arrogant finality. If you refuse Nia, then we are done, he sneered, delivering the ultimatum he believed would instantly break my spirit and bring me to my knees. If you cannot respect my authority as your husband, if you cannot treat my family with the deference they deserve, then I am filing for divorce. And let me make this crystal clear for you. I am a senior financial executive. I know exactly how to navigate the legal system in this state. If you force me to divorce you, I will take half of everything you think you own. I will take this house. I will take your agency. I will drain your accounts dry. He leaned down again, his voice dropping into a harsh, threatening whisper. You will be left with absolutely nothing. You will be a broke, middle-aged woman completely exiled from Atlanta society. You will have no protection, no status, and no husband. So you need to ask yourself right now, Nia, are you ready to lose everything just to prove a point, or are you going to be a good wife? Pick up the phone and fix the mess you made. He stood up straight, crossing his arms over his chest, a smug, victorious smile playing on his lips. He was waiting for the tears. He was waiting for the panic. He was waiting for me to crumble under the sheer, terrifying weight of his patriarchal threat. He believed that the thought of losing him, the thought of losing my marriage and my supposed social protector would immediately force my surrender. I looked at the shattered pieces of the expensive vase lying in the foyer. I looked at the man standing before me, a man who had secretly funneled my money to his parasitic family, a man who had stood by while his mother hurled racist insults at me, A man who believed his gender alone entitled him to the empire I had built with my own blood and sweat. I slowly uncrossed my legs and reached forward, picking up my glass of Cabernet. I took another measured sip, enjoying the complex, robust flavor. I swallowed, placed the glass back down on the marble coaster, and finally looked up into Marcus's arrogant, expectant eyes. I think I said, my voice ringing with absolute terrifying clarity, that a divorce is a brilliant idea, Marcus. Marcus froze. His entire dominating, aggressive posture hit a sudden, invisible brick wall. The absolute certainty that he held my world in the palm of his hand fractured in real time. He expected tears. He expected apologies. He expected the frantic, desperate backpedaling of a woman terrified of losing her husband and her social standing. He was deeply accustomed to the women in his family shrinking the moment a man raised his voice. Instead, he was met with the serene, unblinking gaze of a predator who had just watched her prey walk willingly into a steel cage. The silence in the formal living room shifted from heavy and oppressive to sharp and electric. I did not break eye contact. I let him stew in the momentary confusion, watching the gears in his head jam as his predictable patriarchal script was thrown completely out the window. He scoffed, a wet, ugly sound echoing in the large space. "You are bluffing. You think calling my bluff will make me back down? I am not playing games with you, Nia. I am dead serious." "Neither am I replied softly. I turned my attention away from him, completely dismissing his towering, furious presence. My eyes drifted from the pulsing vein in his neck down to the smooth, reflective surface of the marble coffee table. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I did not argue. I did not engage in a pathetic screaming match. I simply reached down and opened the slim leather briefcase resting by my feet. The sound of the brass clasp popping open was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I pulled out a pristine, exceptionally thick manila folder. I placed it squarely in the center of the table. I opened it with deliberate, measured movements. Inside rested a complete, legally binding petition for the dissolution of marriage. My signature was already inked flawlessly on the petitioner's line dated 2 days prior. I slid the thick stack of legal papers across the smooth marble. They came to a halt exactly at the edge of the table, hovering just inches from his clenched fists. I looked up, the mocking smile cementing itself on my features. "I had my legal team draft these earlier this week." I explained, my tone conversational, as if reviewing a standard public relations campaign brief. "I was waiting for the appropriate moment to present them to you. Your sudden, overwhelming desire to terminate this marriage and flex your authority has saved us both a tremendous amount of tedious scheduling." Marcus stared down at the documents. His chest heaved violently. The muscles in his jaw locked so tightly I could see the bones shifting beneath his skin. He reached out and snatched the papers from the table, his eyes scanning the cover page. He saw my signature. He saw the official seal of the most ruthless, aggressively expensive family law firm in Atlanta. He realized with a sudden jolt of adrenaline that I was not bluffing. But Marcus possessed an ego so massive, so completely detached from the reality of our financial situation, that he could not recognize a lethal trap, even when his own name was typed boldly at the top of it. He fundamentally believed his own lies. He believed that he was the financial pillar of our marriage. He believed his title as a regional financial director meant he inherently held the upper hand in any legal dispute. More importantly, he was banking on a profound, arrogant misunderstanding of Georgia's equitable distribution laws. He assumed that simply because we were married, he was automatically entitled to exactly 50% of my agency, half of the Tuxedo Park estate, half of the investment portfolios, and half of the offshore accounts. He had completely forgotten the boring, tedious legal documents I had asked him to sign 3 years ago. Back then, when Chase was first floating his disastrous tech startup idea, Marcus had wanted to personally invest a portion of his own savings to fund his brother-in-law. I had told Marcus that I fully supported his brotherly investment, but that my corporate lawyers insisted we sign a post-nuptial asset separation agreement to legally shield my agency from any potential liabilities Chase's volatile company might incur. Marcus, desperate to play the wealthy venture capitalist for his family, and utterly convinced of his own financial invincibility, had signed the thick post-nuptial agreement without reading a single page. He had legally permanently severed his rights to the marital estate, firmly establishing that what was mine remained mine, and what was his remained his. And what was his was practically nothing. You actually signed it, Marcus sneered, a dark, triumphant gleam returning to his eyes. He completely mistook my preparation for reckless emotion. He thought I was handing him the keys to the kingdom out of sheer bitter spite. You are such a fool, Nia. You are handing me half of everything. My lawyers are going to absolutely eviscerate you in court. I am going to walk away with millions, and you are going to be paying me alimony for the rest of your miserable life. I reached back into my briefcase and pulled out a heavy, solid gold Mont Blanc pen. I held it out to him, presenting the writing instrument like a ceremonial sword. Then take it, Marcus. I challenged, my voice dropping to a silken, venomous purr. If you are the powerful, wealthy executive you claim to be, sign the paper. Assert your dominance. Take your millions and leave. Or are you going to stand in my living room and throw another empty temper tantrum because you are entirely reliant on a woman you resent? His fragile ego could not withstand the direct challenge. It was chemically impossible for a man like Marcus to back down when his masculinity was questioned by a woman. He snatched the heavy gold pen from my outstretched hand. I am going to destroy you, he growled, bending violently over the marble table. He did not flip past the cover page. He did not read the stipulations. He did not notice the specific clauses referencing the post-nuptial agreement that dictated a total and complete separation of assets. He was blinded by arrogance, fueled by an intoxicating cocktail of rage and unearned superiority. He flipped directly to the final page, searching frantically for the respondent's signature line. He pressed the nib of the pen into the paper so hard it nearly tore right through the thick parchment. He signed his name with aggressive, jagged strokes, executing the single most financially devastating decision of his entire life, with the eager enthusiasm of a man who thought he had just won the lottery. He aggressively flipped to the next page and signed the waiver of financial discovery. He flipped to the final page and signed the expedited processing agreement. He was practically panting by the time he finished. He threw the heavy gold pen back onto the table. It clattered loudly against the marble, rolling to a stop near my wrist. There, Marcus spat, straightening up and aggressively adjusting his suit jacket, reclaiming his posture of absolute authority. It is done. My lawyers will contact your firm by tomorrow morning to begin the asset division. I want a full audit of your agency's accounts by noon. I want the deeds to the properties on my desk. And I want you out of this house by the end of the month. I will be retaining the primary residence. I looked down at the documents. The bold blue ink of his signature was stark, undeniable, and permanent. The trap had flawlessly closed. The steel jaws had snapped shut, and he had gleefully placed his own neck directly into the mechanism. I calmly reached out, collected the scattered pages, tapped them against the marble table to align the edges, and slid them safely back into the manila folder. I closed the cover, resting my hands flat against the cardboard. I will file these with the court first thing tomorrow morning, I said, my voice as placid as a still lake. The judge will likely process the uncontested dissolution within 30 days. 30 days. Marcus mocked, turning toward the hallway, already planning his imaginary wealthy bachelor lifestyle. 30 days, until you are writing me a very, very large check. You better start liquidating your assets, Nia. I will not be writing you a check, Marcus, I replied finally, allowing the full crushing weight of reality to bleed into my tone. He stopped at the edge of the living room, glancing back over his shoulder with a condescending sneer. The law says otherwise. It is called equitable distribution. You make more, I get half. That is how marriage works. That is how marriage works without a postnuptial asset separation agreement. I corrected him smoothly, picking up my wine glass. I watched his face closely, waiting for the exact moment the realization struck. Do you remember signing that incredibly thick stack of documents 3 years ago? The ones my corporate lawyers drafted when you wanted to invest in Chase's imaginary tech firm. You were in such a hurry to prove you were a big-shot investor to your mother that you signed away your rights to the marital estate to protect my assets from your liabilities." Marcus froze. His body went entirely rigid. The condescending sneer vanished, replaced by a sudden sickening slackness. He stared at me, his eyes widening as the memory of that mundane afternoon 3 years ago slowly clawed its way to the forefront of his mind. "That was just for the business." He stammered, his voice suddenly lacking any trace of its former booming authority. "That was just corporate liability shielding." "No, Marcus," I smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression of pure victory. "It was a complete and total separation of assets. It explicitly stated that any property, liquid cash, or corporate equity held in my name or the name of my holding companies remains my sole and separate property in the event of a divorce. You just signed an uncontested petition acknowledging and enforcing that exact agreement. You legally waived your right to contest it." He stood there completely paralyzed, the blood rapidly draining from his face until his skin looked positively ashen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "This house is owned by Obsidian Holdings." I continued, twisting the metaphorical blade with slow, deliberate precision. "My cars are leased through Vanguard Public Relations. The savings accounts are entirely in my name. The only asset bearing your name is the joint checking account where your regional manager's salary is deposited, and the 7-year-old sedan parked in the driveway. You do not get half, Marcus. You get exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is absolutely nothing. Now pack a bag and get out of my house." The heavy silence returned the moment the private security contractors I had retained specifically for this evening escorted Marcus down the driveway. I stood by the front window, a fresh glass of Cabernet in hand, and watched him throw his hastily packed duffel bag into the trunk of his 7-year-old sedan. The taillights faded into the Atlanta night, signaling the absolute end of his parasitic reign. The blood valve was permanently sealed. Now it was time to watch the organism wither. If this were a film, the steady, deliberate pacing of the previous scenes would suddenly accelerate into a kinetic, relentless montage. The camera would whip pan between 3 separate locations, visually connecting the simultaneous collapse of the Blackwell family. The audio track would be driven by the rhythmic, inescapable ticking of a clock synchronized with the sharp digital chime of incoming emails and notification banners flashing aggressively across the screen. Ping. The first notification appeared on Chase's oversized curved monitor in his rented premium co-working space. AWS Cloud Services. Final notice. Account suspended due to non-payment. Chase stared at the screen, his jaw hanging slack. He furiously clicked his expensive wireless mouse, refreshing the page, desperately hoping for a glitch. There was no glitch. The tech startup he had been boasting about on LinkedIn for 2 years, the revolutionary app that was supposed to disrupt the market, was entirely hosted on servers paid for by my holding company. Within 48 hours of me severing the connection, his entire digital infrastructure evaporated into the ether. Ping. Another email popped onto his screen. This one was from the lead developer of the offshore coding team he had hired to actually build the product while he played ping pong in the break room. Invoice 90 days past due. Work halted. Legal action pending. The montage would cut to Chase frantically dialing Marcus's number, the phone pressed hard against his ear as he paced the glass-walled office. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried his mother-in-law. Straight to voicemail. Chase was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of self-made success, but the reality was that he was a plant growing in a greenhouse. I had just shattered the glass and turned off the heat. By day 8, the management of the co-working space deactivated his keycard. The camera would capture him standing in the hallway, pressing his plastic badge against the scanner over and over again, the little light flashing a stubborn, angry red. By day 20, the startup was officially dead. There was no dramatic bankruptcy, no press release, just a quiet, pathetic whimper as Chase was forced to carry his ergonomic keyboard and a box of branded company mugs out to his car, completely bankrupt and utterly exposed. Ping! The visual would aggressively cut to Beatrice's luxury penthouse. The notification this time was not digital. It was physical. a heavy official document taped directly to the center of her pristine custom-painted front door, Sterling Property Management, 30-day notice of eviction and demand for possession. Beatrice stood in the hallway, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, staring at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. The arrogance she had displayed in my office had entirely evaporated, replaced by a hollow, sinking dread. She reached out and peeled the tape from the wood, her hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. She had spent the last 5 years treating the building staff like her personal servants, complaining about the temperature of the lobby, demanding the valet wash her car twice a week, and snapping at the concierge for not sorting her mail quickly enough. The camera would follow her as she marched down to the lobby, clutching the notice, ready to unleash a biblical tirade upon the building manager. But the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. When she slammed the paper onto the concierge desk, demanding an explanation, the manager simply looked at her with a mixture of professional exhaustion and thinly veiled pity. The account had been closed by the owner, she was informed. She was now a trespasser. The reality of her situation began to crush her over the next 2 weeks. Without her $3,500 monthly allowance, Beatrice had absolutely no liquid capital. Her Social Security checks barely covered her expensive grocery habits and her weekly salon appointments. The montage would show her sitting at her dining table, surrounded by unpaid utility bills, frantically trying to balance a checkbook that had no funds. It would show her attempting to use her key fob to access the rooftop infinity pool, only to find she had been locked out of all resident amenities. The woman who had proudly declared that she was doing the Lord's work with my money was now spending her evenings wrapping her authentic pearl necklaces in bubble wrap, preparing to move into a cramped, depressing apartment in a zip code she used to openly mock. Ping. The final cut of the montage would focus entirely on Marcus. Alert. Insufficient funds. Overdraft fee applied. Marcus was sitting on the edge of a bed in a generic beige extended stay hotel near the airport. It was a staggering downgrade from the sprawling multi-million-dollar estate in Tuxedo Park. The room smelled faintly of stale carpet cleaner and industrial bleach. He was staring at the banking app on his phone, the red numbers glaring back at him in the dim lighting. He had severely, fatally miscalculated his own financial worth. For years, his mid-level regional manager salary had been seamlessly absorbed into the massive ocean of my corporate wealth. He had never actually seen how quickly his paycheck vanished when forced to cover real standalone expenses. The hotel required a massive upfront deposit. He had to secure his own individual car insurance policy, which skyrocketed without the multi-vehicle corporate discount. He had to buy his own meals, pay for his own dry cleaning, and manage his own subscriptions. Within exactly 14 days of moving out, his account was bleeding dry. Yet Marcus was a man fiercely dedicated to his own pride. He refused to admit defeat. The montage would capture the sheer exhausting effort he put into maintaining his facade. He told his colleagues he was staying at the hotel as a temporary convenience while coordinating a massive real estate flip. He told his few remaining friends that he had initiated the separation because he needed a woman who was more traditional. The ultimate cracking of his mask occurred at the Oak Ridge Country Club. Marcus had walked into the main dining room wearing a freshly pressed suit, projecting the aura of a master of the universe. He sat at the bar, ordered a top-shelf scotch, and loudly engaged the bartender in a conversation about market trends, ensuring the men sitting nearby could hear his financial jargon. When the bartender handed him the leather billfold, Marcus casually dropped his personal platinum credit card onto the tray, without even looking at the total. The camera would push in on his face, capturing the exact moment the bartender returned, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "I am sorry, sir," the bartender murmured, keeping his voice low to spare him the embarrassment. The card was declined. Marcus stiffened. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He let out a harsh, overly loud chuckle, aggressively attempting to brush off the humiliation. "It is a banking security freeze," he announced to the bartender, raising his voice so the surrounding patrons could hear the excuse. "When you move high volumes of capital, the fraud department gets overly sensitive. Run this one instead." He pulled a standard high-interest rate credit card from his wallet, a card he had secretly opened years ago and kept hidden. The bartender swiped it. The transaction was approved, but the damage was irreversible. The sweat beaded on Marcus's forehead as he took a sip of his scotch. The liquor tasted like ash. He was surrounded by actual wealth sitting in a room full of men who owned their own empires, and he suddenly realized he was nothing more than an imposter playing dress-up in a life I had financed. The dominoes had fallen. The chain reaction of financial starvation had successfully decimated their arrogant reality. Within 20 days, the Blackwell family had been entirely stripped of their unearned armor, left to face the brutal, unforgiving world, using only the resources they had actually earned. And as the montage faded out, leaving only the image of Marcus staring blankly into his empty glass, the truth was glaringly obvious. They were utterly, entirely bankrupt. The camera would detach from my perspective, now adopting a voyeuristic, predatory tracking shot. It would glide silently through the humid Atlanta night, pushing through the cracked plastic blinds of a cramped, dimly lit two-bedroom apartment located far outside the perimeter of the city. The air inside the room was thick with the smell of cheap, greasy takeout and unfiltered desperation. This was Olivia and Chase's rapidly downsizing reality, and it currently served as the pathetic war room for the exiled Blackwell family. The lens would stay tight, lingering in the shadows, creating the distinct claustrophobic sensation of eavesdropping. Beatrice was perched on the edge of a sagging plaid sofa, her posture rigid, her authentic pearls replaced by a cheap, tarnished chain. She was clutching a lukewarm mug of tap water, her eyes darting nervously around the cramped space as if the peeling wallpaper might physically attack her. Chase was slumped in a folding chair, gnawing aggressively on his thumbnail, the grandiose posture of a tech founder completely eradicated by the brutal reality of a $0 bank balance. Olivia sat on the floor, her arms crossed tight over her chest, glaring at the stained carpet. And then there was Marcus. He was pacing the narrow length of the living room, exactly 5 steps forward, 5 steps back. His suit was wrinkled, his collar unbuttoned, the manicured polish of his corporate executive persona cracking at the edges. But his eyes possessed a manic, feverish intensity. He was a drowning man who had just spotted what he believed to be a solid oak life raft. "We are not finished," Marcus announced, his voice, a harsh, raspy whisper that cut through the heavy gloom of the apartment. "She thinks she is one because she controls the bank accounts. She thinks she can isolate us, starve us out, and force us to crawl back to her on our hands and knees. But she is arrogant. She forgot the most important rule of this city." He stopped pacing and turned to face his captive, broken audience. The camera would slowly push in on his face, capturing the toxic, self-righteous delusion radiating from his pores. "In Atlanta, money talks, but the culture dictates who gets to listen," Marcus declared, jabbing a finger into the stale air. "Naya's entire public relations empire relies on her reputation. It relies on the Black elite. It relies on the politicians, the executives, the local influencers, and the HBCU alumni networks. She is a powerhouse because the community believes she is a pillar of that community. If we destroy the pillar, the entire structure collapses." Beatrice looked up, a glimmer of her old venomous religious fervor returning to her exhausted eyes. "How, Marcus? She locked the accounts. She evicted me. She stripped us bare. The devil has his claws firmly in that woman. How do we fight someone who holds all the gold?" By using the one thing she cannot buy, Marcus sneered, a dark, predatory smile stretching across his face. "The narrative." He resumed his pacing, his hands gesturing wildly as he laid out the architecture of his masterstroke. It was a plan born of pure, unadulterated malice and fueled by his fragile, deeply bruised masculinity. "I had a meeting with the regional directors this afternoon." Marcus lied, spinning a desperate, grandiose fabrication to keep his family in line. "The current vice president of logistics is retiring at the end of the month. They essentially offered me the position off the record. The formal announcement is happening on Friday. It comes with a massive bump in equity, a company vehicle, and a 6-figure signing bonus." A collective, audible gasp of relief rippled through the cramped living room. Chase sat up straighter. Beatrice pressed a hand to her chest, whispering a quick, breathless prayer of thanks to a god she only invoked for financial gain. None of them questioned him. None of them asked for proof. They were starving, and he was offering them an imaginary feast. "We are going to celebrate my promotion," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with poisonous intent. "We are going to host a private exclusive dinner at the Sovereign." Chase's eyes widened in sheer panic. "The Sovereign, Marcus? That is the most expensive exclusive dining room in Buckhead. There is a 3-month waiting list just to get a table, let alone a private event space. We do not have the liquid cash to cover a deposit for water there, let alone a catered dinner." "I handled the deposit," Marcus snapped, waving away the logistics like a minor inconvenience. He did not tell them that he had walked into a predatory high-interest payday loan center that very morning, using the pink slip of his 7-year-old sedan as collateral to secure a desperately reckless cash advance. He was betting his literal survival on a promotion that existed entirely in his own inflated imagination. "We are going to invite the absolute cream of the crop," Marcus instructed, outlining his strategy with military precision. "We invite the Morehouse and Spelman alumni boards. We invite the presidents of the local Divine Nine chapters. We invite the city council members Nia just signed. We pack the room with the most influential, highly visible Black professionals in Atlanta. We invite them to celebrate my promotion. And when the room is full, when everyone has a glass of champagne in their hand, I am going to stand up and make a toast." The voyeuristic camera angle would shift, shooting Marcus from below, making him look monstrous, looming, and terrifyingly arrogant. "I am going to tell them the tragic truth about my marriage," Marcus whispered, his eyes gleaming with malicious excitement. "I am going to tell them that the stress of her father's illness completely broke her mind. I will say she became paranoid, unstable, financially abusive. I will paint a picture of a woman who lost her grip on reality, a woman who started locking her own husband out of his accounts, throwing her elderly mother-in-law onto the street, and alienating the family who loved her." Beatrice gasped, clapping her hands together. The perfect narrative, the concerned, heartbroken husband stepping away to protect his peace. "Exactly," Marcus nodded, pointing at his mother. "I will frame the divorce not as a battle over assets, but as a tragic necessity for my own mental health and physical safety. I will tell the most powerful people in her professional network that the great untouchable Nia Blackwell is actually an erratic, hysterical, angry woman who cannot handle the pressure of her own success. I will dump her publicly in front of the exact people she needs to maintain her business. By the time dessert is served, she will be a social pariah. Nobody in this city will sign a contract with a PR executive who is known to be mentally unstable and emotionally abusive. We will bankrupt her reputation, and once her agency bleeds clients, she will be forced to settle the divorce on my terms just to stay afloat." The room fell into a heavy, awestruck silence. The sheer scale of the character assassination was breathtaking. It was a scorched earth campaign designed to utterly isolate me from my culture, my community, and my livelihood. Marcus was not just trying to win a divorce, he was trying to execute a public social crucifixion. Olivia finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly with a mixture of fear and awe. "What if she tries to defend herself? What if she shows them the post-nuptial agreement or the bank statements?" "Let her try." Marcus laughed, a cold, empty sound. "Who are they going to believe? The calm, collected, newly promoted vice president who is standing in front of them, shedding a tear for his broken marriage, or the aggressive, defensive woman screaming about bank accounts and contracts? The moment she raises her voice to defend herself, she proves my exact point. She becomes the angry Black woman stereotype right in front of their eyes. It is a trap she cannot escape." Beatrice nodded vigorously, her moral compass entirely corrupted by the promise of reclaiming her luxury lifestyle. "We must pray for her soul," Beatrice murmured, her voice dripping with fake, sugary piety. "We must show them that we are a family of grace forced to make a difficult decision. We will be the victims." Marcus walked over to the cheap laminate kitchen counter and picked up his phone. He began scrolling through his contact list, his thumb hovering over the names of the most powerful people in my professional sphere. He was banking everything: his pride, his stolen funds, his non-existent promotion on the patriarchal assumption that his word as a man would automatically supersede my entire history of professional integrity. He believed that the society of Atlanta would gladly watch a successful woman burn at the stake if her husband lit the match. "The invitations go out tonight," Marcus ordered, his tone absolute. "We booked the private dining room for Friday evening. Dress to the nines. Wear the jewelry you still have. Project absolute wealth and stability. We are going to walk into the Sovereign as the ruling family of Atlanta, and we are going to leave Nia bleeding out in the social gutter." The voyeuristic camera would slowly pull back, retreating through the cracked plastic blinds, leaving the Blackwell family huddled in the dim light of their rented misery. They were completely intoxicated by their own toxic scheme, entirely unaware that a trap built on delusions, funded by predatory loans, and fueled by arrogance, was not a weapon. It was a suicide vest, and Marcus had just securely fastened it around his own chest. The camera sweeps down in a smooth cinematic crane shot, capturing the gleaming glass facade of the Emory University Hospital expansion. It glides past the manicured courtyards and the valet stand, pushing through the pristine sliding doors to find me walking with purposeful, unhurried steps down the polished corridor of the VIP recovery wing. The atmosphere here is a universe away from the stale, suffocating air of the apartment Marcus and his family are currently rotting inside. Here, the air is crisp, clinical, and quiet. I push open the heavy oak door to a private sunlit corner suite. My father is sitting up in a plush leather recliner, a customized physical therapy plan printed out on the table beside him. The gray pallor that had clouded his skin for months is completely gone, replaced by a warm, healthy vitality. The aggressive cutting-edge treatments that my corporate insurance and private wealth had entirely funded have worked miracles. He is not just surviving, he is thriving. "You look like a woman who just won a war," he says, his voice carrying that familiar booming resonance that had anchored my entire childhood. He sets down his newspaper and smiles, the corners of his eyes crinkling with genuine joy. "The war is already won, Dad," I reply, leaning down to press a kiss to his cheek. "I am just conducting the final cleanup." We spend a peaceful hour together. He talks about his physical therapy progress, complaining good-naturedly about the strict dietary restrictions the top-tier cardiologists have placed him on. I listen to him complain with a profound sense of gratitude. This was exactly why I built my empire. I did not build it to fund the arrogant delusions of a mediocre man. I built it to protect the people who actually mattered. I ensure his private nurses have everything they need, settle his account for the week with a single swipe of my black card, and step back out into the humid Atlanta afternoon. As I hand my ticket to the hospital valet, my phone vibrates in the pocket of my blazer. It is a text from my executive assistant containing a forwarded digital invitation. A moment later, an identical heavy cardstock envelope is delivered to my office via specialized courier. I slide into the supple leather seat of my car and open the digital file. The graphic design is ostentatious, dripping with gold foil digital accents and aggressive sweeping calligraphy. "You are cordially invited to an evening of celebration and elevation, honoring the promotion of Marcus Jenkins to Vice President of Regional Logistics. The venue listed is the Sovereign." I stare at the screen. I do not panic. I do not feel a single ounce of anxiety or fear. Instead, a slow, dark laugh escapes my lips, echoing in the quiet interior of my car. Marcus is so predictable that his moves are practically telegraphed in neon lights. I recognize the guest list attached to the event planner's forward. It is a meticulously curated roster of my entire professional ecosystem. He has invited the alumni presidents from Morehouse and Spelman. He has invited the regional directors of the Divine Nine fraternities and sororities. He has invited 2 state senators, whose campaigns I personally manage. He has invited the exact demographic of the Black elite in Atlanta that my public relations firm relies on to operate. He is not hosting a celebration, he is staging a public execution. I can see his entire strategy unfolding with crystal clarity. He plans to stand in front of the people I respect, the people I do business with, and paint me as an unhinged, hysterical woman. He wants to leverage the deeply entrenched patriarchal biases of corporate culture to destroy my reputation before I can finalize the divorce. He thinks he can use my own community to isolate me, starve my agency of its highest-paying clients, and force me into a desperate financial settlement. It is actually quite a brilliant plan, assuming I am the fragile emotional victim he believes me to be. But Marcus has fundamentally misjudged his opponent. He thinks he is playing chess against a desperate housewife. He does not realize he is sitting across the table from the house itself. I do not block the invitation. I do not call the venue to cancel his reservation, even though a single phone call from my office could have his entire event pulled from the calendar. I press the button to start my engine, sync my phone to the car audio, and dial the direct line of my lead corporate attorney. She answers on the first ring. Helen. I say, my voice dropping to a smooth surgical register. I need you to pull the complete financial dossier we compiled during the asset separation audit. I need the hard copies, every single page. I am already looking at them, Naya. Helen replies, her tone matching my ruthless efficiency. The forensic accountants finished their deep dive this morning. You were right to ask for a secondary sweep of the joint accounts before we froze them. Marcus has been sloppy. Tell me I instruct merging onto the highway. He has been actively embezzling from your secondary business accounts for the last 14 months. Helen explains, the sound of flipping paper audible through the speakers. He forged your digital signature on 3 separate occasions to authorize wire transfers to a shell company registered under his mother's name. The amounts were just small enough to bypass the automated executive flags, but the paper trail is undeniable. Total stolen funds amount to roughly $85,000. Furthermore, we pulled the financing data on this dinner he is throwing at the Sovereign. He secured the deposit using a predatory title loan on his vehicle at an interest rate of 47%. He is completely insolvent. A cold thrill courses through my veins. He is not just a liar, he is a documented thief. He had been quietly siphoning my hard-earned capital to fund Beatrice's shopping habits and his own ridiculous country club tabs. And now he is planning to stand in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta and claim I am the one who is financially abusive. Compile the LLC ownership documents I order accelerating down the interstate. Compile the bank statements proving I am the sole financier of the Tuxedo Park estate. Compile the post-nuptial agreement bearing his signature, and put the embezzlement evidence right on top. I want it all bound in a single leather portfolio. Have it on my desk by tomorrow morning. Consider it done, Helen says. Are we forwarding this to the district attorney? Not yet, I smile, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I have a dinner party to attend first. I end the call and dial my public relations director. I give her explicit instructions. She is to quietly reach out to every single person on Marcus's guest list. She is not to cancel his event. Instead, she is to personally confirm their attendance. She is to ensure that the room at the Sovereign is packed to absolute capacity. I want every senator, every board member, and every influential voice in the city sitting in that room when Marcus picks up his glass to make his little toast. If Marcus wants an audience, I'm going to give him a sold-out show. The weapon is fully loaded, the safety is off, and the target has willingly painted a giant red bullseye on his own forehead. He thinks he can use my culture against me. He thinks he can manipulate the black elite of Atlanta into viewing me as a failure. He is entirely blind to the fact that I am the one who writes the narrative in this city. I shape public perception for a living. I build empires, and I know exactly how to demolish them. I arrive at my office building and take the private elevator up to my suite. I walk over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, pulsing heart of Atlanta. The city lights are just beginning to flicker on as the sun dips below the horizon. I stand there perfectly still, feeling the absolute power of preparation. I will not hide. I will not shrink. I will walk into the Sovereign wearing a custom-tailored gown and a smile made of shattered glass. I will let him speak. I will let him spin his pathetic, desperate lies. I will let him climb all the way to the top of his imaginary pedestal. And then with a single, undeniable stack of paper, I am going to push him off the edge. Friday evening at the Sovereign was an intoxicating display of Southern wealth and influence. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfume-aged bourbon and the quiet ambient hum of a live jazz quartet playing in the corner. The venue itself was a masterpiece of design featuring velvet-paneled walls, towering brass fixtures, and dim golden lighting that cast everything in a warm, forgiving glow. It was the absolute epicenter of the Atlanta Black elite, and Marcus had managed to commandeer the raised semi-private alcove at the back of the main dining room. He was standing near a towering floral arrangement, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne he had purchased with stolen money. He was dressed in a pristine, tailored tuxedo, projecting the aura of a man who owned the world. Flanking him were Beatrice Chase and Olivia, acting as his royal court. Beatrice was wearing a gaudy sequined dress, her head held high, nodding solemnly at whatever her son was saying. Chase was leaning against a velvet pillar, trying to look like a relaxed tech mogul, while Olivia stood rigidly nearby, a tight, practiced smile plastered across her face. Marcus was currently speaking to a group of highly influential guests. I recognized them immediately. The dean of a prestigious local university, the board president of a major philanthropic foundation, and a prominent state senator whose re-election campaign my agency was currently managing. Marcus had his hand pressed lightly against his chest, his expression arranged into a mask of brave, quiet sorrow. He was mid-performance, expertly planting the seeds of his victim narrative. He was speaking in hushed, somber tones about the heavy burdens of marriage, hinting at dark, unmanageable struggles behind the closed doors of our estate. He was preparing to portray me as a woman who had cracked under the pressure of corporate success, an unstable liability he was valiantly trying to manage. Then the heavy brass-handled doors of the main dining room swung open. If this were a film, the camera would immediately drop to the floor, adopting a slow-motion predatory tracking shot. The ambient noise of the restaurant would suddenly mute, replaced by the sharp metallic rhythmic strike of 5-inch Christian Louboutin stilettos, hitting the imported Italian marble. The camera would glide slowly upward, taking in the hem of an emerald green custom-tailored silk gown. The fabric moved like liquid glass, clinging to every curve, radiating a dangerous, untouchable elegance. It was a garment designed for warfare, featuring powerful structured shoulders and a plunging neckline that showcased a blindingly brilliant diamond choker resting against flawless skin. The camera would finally reach my face. My expression was a mask of absolute terrifying serenity. I did not look like a broken, hysterical woman. I looked like an apex predator stepping willingly into an enclosure full of trapped prey. I was not alone. Flanking me on my right was Helen, my lead corporate attorney. She was wearing a severe, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, her expression carved from solid granite. Tucked firmly under her arm was the thick black leather portfolio containing the total financial annihilation of Marcus Jenkins. Flanking us on either side were two towering, silent private security contractors dressed in dark, perfectly fitted suits. We did not look like a woman crashing a party. We looked like an executive tribunal arriving to hand down a final death sentence. The sovereign was designed for the elite, and the elite possessed a highly tuned instinctual radar for sudden shifts in power. The low, sultry notes of the jazz band seemed to evaporate entirely as the chatter of the room rapidly died down. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The sea of wealthy, influential guests automatically parted, creating a wide, clear path directly down the center of the restaurant. They recognized me immediately. I was the woman who managed their campaigns, protected their corporate images, and controlled their press cycles. I was the gatekeeper to their public success. They did not see an erratic, unhinged wife. They saw the Queen of Atlanta public relations, and they stepped aside with quiet, profound respect. Marcus was just about to deliver the punchline of his tragic husband monologue. He was preparing to officially announce his fake promotion and leverage the room's sympathy to publicly humiliate me. But he noticed the sudden silence. He saw the state senator he was just schmoozing look past his shoulder with an expression of deep, deferential awe. Marcus stopped speaking. He turned around. The arrogant, gloating smile practically melted off his face in real time. The glass of champagne in his hand shook so violently that a few drops spilled over the crystal rim, landing directly on his rented tuxedo shoe. The color completely drained from his skin, leaving him looking hollow and entirely terrified. Behind him, his royal court shattered. Beatrice froze completely, her mouth dropping open, her eyes widening in sheer unadulterated horror as she registered the towering private security guards flanking my sides. Chase actually took a physical step backward, in pure panic, bumping hard into a waiter carrying a tray of caviar canapes. Olivia simply stopped breathing, her rigid posture turning into literal paralysis. I began to move down the cleared path. I did not rush. I took my time, letting the rhythmic click of my heels serve as a slow, agonizing countdown timer to their destruction. I stopped along the way, casually reaching out to touch the arm of the city councilwoman Marcus had been targeting just moments before. "It is so wonderful to see you, Diane," I said, my voice warm, resonant, and perfectly modulated, carrying effortlessly through the quiet room. "We will finalize that press strategy for your new initiative on Monday morning. Call my office at 9. She beamed at me, entirely charmed, and visibly relieved by my professional composure. I nodded to the university board member. I smiled warmly at a prominent judge. With every graceful, perfectly sane interaction, I systematically dismantled the hysterical woman narrative Marcus had been desperately trying to build for the last hour. I was cementing my social capital right in front of his eyes, proving to the entire room that I was firmly in control of my reality. I finally reached the edge of the private alcove. The tension in the immediate space around Marcus's table compressed until it was physically suffocating. The air felt incredibly heavy, charged with a violent, invisible electricity. The surrounding guests were watching completely breathless, sensing a monumental, catastrophic shift in gravity. Marcus desperately tried to recover. He scrambled to play his hand, attempting to project the image of a concerned, pitying husband, trying to manage an unpredictable wife who had wandered out of bounds. "Nia," Marcus said, forcing his voice to sound gentle and patronizing, though it cracked noticeably on the very first syllable. "What are you doing here? You should be at home resting. You have been under so much mental strain lately. We are all so worried about you." I stepped up the short staircase into the alcove, stopping exactly 3 feet away from him. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I did not give him a single ounce of the aggressive reaction he desperately needed to validate his lie. I simply looked at him with a gaze so cold and hollow it could freeze boiling water. My silence forced him to stand completely exposed in the awkwardness of his own fabrication. Helen stepped forward smoothly, bypassing Marcus entirely. She placed the heavy leather portfolio directly onto the center of his cocktail table with a loud, authoritative thud that echoed in the quiet space. "I am not here to rest, Marcus," I replied, my voice carrying the smooth, lethal cadence of a corporate executioner. "I am here to celebrate. I received your beautiful digital invitation. It was so incredibly thoughtful of you to gather my entire professional network into one single room. It saves my legal team a tremendous amount of tedious administrative outreach." His eyes darted frantically from my face to the portfolio, then to the imposing security guards blocking the exit. "You need to leave right now," he hissed, dropping the gentle husband act, entirely his true, panicked, malicious nature bleeding through his gritted teeth. "This is a private, corporate event. You are making a fool of yourself in front of my colleagues." I took a single deliberate step closer to him. The faint scent of his nervous sweat hit my nose, a sharp contrast to his expensive cologne. "I am not making a fool of myself, Marcus," I whispered, ensuring only he and his terrified family could hear the absolute crushing finality in my tone. "I am simply delivering your promotion gift." I turned my attention to my attorney, not breaking eye contact with my soon-to-be ex-husband. "Helen," I commanded, my voice ringing out clearly for the surrounding crowd to hear, "please open the portfolio." It is time the imaginary vice president of regional logistics shared his true financial genius with the rest of the room. Helen's manicured fingers unfastened the heavy brass clasp of the leather portfolio. The sharp metallic click echoed like a gunshot in the breathless silence of the alcove. But Marcus could not bring himself to look down. To look at the documents would be to acknowledge that gravity still existed, and he had already decided to step off the cliff. Instead, his survival instinct, forged in a lifetime of patriarchal entitlement and unearned privilege, forced him into a spectacular, catastrophic double down. He pivoted violently away from the table, turning his back on the leather-bound truth. He reached out and snatched the wireless microphone from the silver stand he had explicitly rented for his moment of glory. He gripped the black cylinder so tightly, his knuckles turned a bloodless white. The camera would smash cut to an extreme close-up of Marcus's face. A heavy bead of sweat raced down his temple. His jaw worked frantically, the muscles jumping beneath his skin as he desperately manufactured his alternate reality. Cut to an extreme close-up of my face. I remained perfectly still. I did not blink. There was no anger, no sorrow, and absolutely no fear. There was only the cold, calculating observation of an apex predator watching its prey willingly step into a steel trap and secure the lock itself. Marcus raised the microphone. When he spoke, he completely bypassed me, projecting his booming, practiced voice into the vast, silent expanse of the sovereign's main dining room. He addressed the state senators, the university deans, the alumni presidents, and the corporate heavyweights. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus boomed, his voice vibrating with a meticulously manufactured, trembling sorrow. I must apologize for this unfortunate disruption, but truthfully, I am glad you are all here to witness this. This is the exact tragedy I brought you here tonight to discuss. He paced a tight, agitated circle within the alcove, aggressively ignoring the towering security guards blocking the exit and actively refusing to make eye contact with my attorney. The camera would whip pan back to my face. My lips curved into the faintest, most chilling fraction of a smile. I tilted my head, offering him the floor. Go on, Marcus. Dig the grave as deep as you like. As Black men, as leaders in our community, we are tasked with an impossible burden. Marcus continued, his voice gaining a dangerous, intoxicating momentum. He was entirely seduced by his own lie in real time. We are tasked with building empires, with lifting up our families. We pour our blood, sweat, and resources into establishing a foundation of generational wealth. We lead, we provide. But sometimes the foundation we build is fatally compromised from the inside. Cut to a tight shot of Beatrice. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand flat against the cheap, tarnished chain resting on her sequined chest. She nodded slowly, her face contorted into a mask of profound, pious agony. Lord, give him strength, Beatrice murmured, projecting her voice just loud enough for the front row of VIP tables to hear. She was weaponizing her religion to sell her son's delusion, playing the role of the heartbroken matriarch to absolute perfection. Cut back to Marcus. Sometimes Marcus said, pointing a dramatic, shaking finger in my general direction, though deliberately avoiding my lethal gaze, you try to uplift a woman who simply cannot handle the altitude. You provide a beautiful life. You offer protection. But success is a heavy crown, and it breaks fragile minds. The sheer audacity of his words hung suspended in the velvet-draped room. The state senator sitting at the nearest table slowly set her champagne flute down on the pristine linen tablecloth, her eyes darting in sheer disbelief between Marcus's sweating face and my absolute terrifying calm. When a man reaches the level of Vice President, Marcus declared, his chest puffing out, clinging desperately to the phantom promotion he had invented. To secure his payday loans, he needs a partner who is a pillar of stability. He needs a woman who understands traditional values and respect, not a liability, not a woman who suffers from paranoid delusions, who locks her husband out of his own bank accounts and creates public spectacles because her own career has stalled and left her feeling inadequate. He gripped the microphone with both hands, leaning forward, playing to the back of the room. There comes a time when a leader must make the excruciating decision to protect his peace. Marcus announced, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. There comes a time when a man must surgically remove a tumor to save the rest of the body. He practically spat the word tumor. The insult was a calculated strike designed to humiliate me, to strip me of my dignity in front of the very people who paid my agency millions. He was attempting to reframe my arrival not as an exhibition of absolute power, but as an act of desperate, hysterical jealousy from a broken woman. Close up on Chase. The camera would catch the exact moment Chase decided to tether his sinking ship to Marcus's plunging anchor. Desperate for the narrative to be true, frantic to believe that Marcus still possessed the corporate power to resurrect his dead tech startup, Chase grabbed his half-empty glass of champagne. He tapped a silver spoon against the crystal, producing a sharp, ringing chime of desperate solidarity that echoed awkwardly in the tense dining room. To true leadership, Chase called out, his voice slightly shrill and entirely unconvincing. To protecting your peace, man. Beatrice immediately chimed in, her voice quivering with performative grief. Amen. We must pray for those who have lost their minds to jealousy. We must cut the toxic ties. The camera would execute rapid, disorienting cuts between the three of them. Marcus clutching the microphone like a shield, Chase desperately clinging to his crystal glass, Beatrice performing her holy sorrow. They were a pathetic trio of parasites, entirely convinced that their collective delusion could magically override documented, undeniable reality. They believed that if they simply spoke the lie loudly enough, the universe would bow to their entitlement. Then the lens would snap back to me, holding steady on my face. I had let him speak. I had allowed the heavy silence of the room to absorb every single syllable of his toxic, misogynistic monologue. I wanted the absolute elite of Atlanta to hear exactly how he viewed the woman who had single-handedly financed his entire adult existence. I wanted them to bear witness to the absolute unfathomable depths of his unearned arrogance. Marcus lowered the microphone. His chest was heaving. He waited for the murmurs of sympathy to ripple through the crowd. He waited for the influential men in the room to nod in solemn patriarchal agreement. He waited for the powerful women to cast me glances of pity and scorn. Absolutely nothing happened. The silence in the sovereign remained absolute. It was not a silence of awe or respect for Marcus Jenkins. It was the suffocating heavy silence of a room full of highly intelligent apex predators who had just recognized the distinct metallic smell of blood. They were not looking at Marcus with sympathy. They were looking at him like he was a dead man walking. My network did not achieve their multi-million-dollar status by being easily manipulated by a mid-level regional manager in a rented tuxedo. The state senators, the corporate board members, the alumni presidents, they all knew my portfolio intimately. They knew my agency represented the most lucrative accounts in the city. They knew my mind was sharper than a surgical scalpel. They looked at Marcus sweating and red-faced, and then they looked at me, standing flanked by a top-tier corporate attorney and heavily armed private security, radiating the calm authority of a sovereign ruler. The contrast was fatal. I uncrossed my arms. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the heavy silk of my emerald gown rustling softly against the marble floor. I did not need a microphone. When you truly own the room, you never have to shout. A tumor, I repeated. I let the word drop an octave, slipping into a low velvet purr that carried effortlessly to the very back of the dining hall. The word tasted like copper on my tongue. What an absolutely fascinating choice of words, Marcus. Cut to a brutal close-up of Marcus. The triumph in his eyes instantly fractured. A hairline crack of sheer unadulterated terror appeared as he realized his grand speech had not broken me. It had not humiliated me. It had only entertained me. I took another step forward, closing the distance. Helen moved seamlessly beside me. With a swift, practiced motion, she flipped the heavy leather portfolio completely open, turning it so the documents faced the crowd directly behind Marcus. You speak so eloquently to this room about the burden of the black man building an empire. I continued, my gaze locking onto his, physically preventing him from looking away. You speak of providing, of protecting, of reaching the lofty, unparalleled heights of vice president. But the fatal flaw in your beautiful, tragic narrative, Marcus, is that an empire requires actual capital. I raised a single finger, pointing directly to the open portfolio resting on his table. Helen, I commanded softly, yet the entire room heard the directive with crystal clarity. Please read the opening summary of the Vice President's personal financial audit. Let us show this esteemed room exactly how this man provides. The camera would detach from its static position, initiating a sweeping, unbroken 360-degree arc shot circling me as the absolute center of gravity in the room. The luxurious ambient lighting of the Sovereign would catch the flash of my diamond choker as I moved, reinforcing my untouchable status. I did not wait for Helen to read the clinical numbers. Instead, I reached forward and effortlessly slid the microphone directly from Marcus's clammy, rigid fingers. He did not even attempt to resist. His muscles had completely locked in a state of terminal shock. I did not glare. I did not raise my voice in anger. I simply smiled a radiant, terrifying expression of absolute victory and raised the microphone to my lips. I apologize for the confusion, Atlanta. I announced, my voice dripping with honeyed poison, perfectly amplified across the dead silent dining room. But there will be no celebration tonight, because Marcus Jenkins is not being promoted to vice president. In fact, as of 9 o'clock this morning, he is completely unemployed. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the gathered elite. Marcus swayed slightly on his feet, his jaw working uselessly as his entire fabricated reality collapsed around him. You see, my public relations empire is the primary strategic partner holding the largest crisis management contract with his corporate headquarters. I explained smoothly, pacing a slow, deliberate step within the camera's continuous circular tracking. A contract I personally terminated this morning. I informed his board of directors that their golden logistics manager was actively embezzling corporate funds to funnel into a fraudulent shell company owned by his brother-in-law. I pivoted, locking my gaze onto Chase. The camera would follow, capturing the exact second the smug, relaxed tech mogul facade melted off his pale face. Chase. I continued, my smile widening into something lethal. You have always been so incredibly vocal about self-reliance, about men pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps. I realized my financial support was actually hindering your entrepreneurial spirit. So I decided to help you practice exactly what you preach. I permanently severed the $3,500 monthly allowance your mother-in-law has been secretly siphoning from my personal accounts to fund your pathetic, non-existent tech startup for the last 3 years. Happy bootstrapping. Chase physically slumped against the velvet pillar, the blood completely draining from his skin, looking like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. I turned my attention back to the cocktail table. I reached into Helen's open portfolio, retrieving the thick, heavy stack of forensic financial documents. I did not gently place them down. I slammed the entire stack onto the table with a violent, echoing crack directly in front of Beatrice. She flinched violently, letting out a sharp, involuntary squeak as her sequined chest heaved in terror. And as for the pious matriarch of this distinguished family, I declared, my voice slicing through the heavy air with surgical precision. You might want to start packing your bags tonight. The luxury perimeter apartment you currently reside in and the Mercedes your son drove to this venue tonight to show off to my colleagues are not the fruits of his labor. They are entirely and legally owned by a private LLC. An LLC registered solely and exclusively in my name. The collective gasp that followed my revelation was not one of shock, but of absolute brutal finality. I did not raise my voice as I delivered the final fatal strike. The room was so quiet that every syllable landed like a physical blow against the shattered remnants of his pride. Keep your imaginary promotion, Marcus, I said, my voice smooth, cold, and perfectly composed. Whatever pennies you manage to scrape together from this point forward are entirely yours. But the survival of this family, the luxury you paraded around in the roof over your mother's head, all of it was funded by my money. Your parents are now your problems. I paused, letting the reality of his new destitute existence crash down upon him. The arrogant tech founder facade that Chase had been desperately clinging to finally disintegrated. He stood paralyzed, stripped of his unearned allowance, and thoroughly humiliated in front of the very venture capitalists and elite investors he had spent the last hour trying to court. They were looking at him not as a peer, but as a pathetic, exposed parasite. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my properties, I announced, my gaze sweeping across Marcus, Beatrice, and Chase. My legal team will handle the formal eviction proceedings if you fail to comply. You wanted a public divorce, Marcus. You wanted to execute me in front of my city. Congratulations on your spectacular success. Marcus stared at me, his eyes wide and entirely vacant. The manic energy that had fueled his grand delusional speech was completely extinguished. He finally understood that in his desperate attempt to assassinate my character, he had effectively signed his own financial death warrant and publicly confessed to corporate theft. He had brought the match, but I owned the gasoline and he was standing right in the center of the inferno. I did not wait for a response. I did not need one. I lowered the microphone, placing it gently onto the cocktail table right next to the thick stack of his documented financial crimes. The soft clatter of the plastic against the wood was the official gavel strike ending his reign. The camera would execute a slow, cinematic dolly out, capturing the absolute devastation I left in my wake. I turned my back on the alcove, and the sea of Atlanta's elite parted for me once again. They did not speak, but the profound respect in their eyes was undeniable. I walked toward the heavy brass doors of the Sovereign, my posture perfect, my custom emerald gown flowing flawlessly behind me. I was leaving Marcus and his royal court to drown in the chaotic, humiliating ruin of their own making. I stepped out into the warm, humid night air. A sleek, black luxury sedan was idling smoothly at the valet stand, its engine a low, powerful purr. The rear door was already open. Sitting inside, looking healthier and more vibrant than he had in a decade, was my father. He gave me a warm, knowing smile, his eyes shining with absolute, unwavering pride. He knew the war was over. I slid into the plush leather seat beside him. The heavy car door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me safely inside my hard-won peace. The backstab had been paid in full, and their destruction was absolute.